The last section of psycholinguistics is about cursing. So thinking about the uses of cursing and metaphors and how curse words came to be. And so a lot of this comes from a book called The Stuff of Thought, which is by Steven Pinker, which is a really fascinating book on why do we have language? So what's the purpose of language? If you ask people this, most of them end up deciding on communication. So we are social creatures. We like to communicate. And so there are many forms of communication, but most interestingly, we're going to look at cursing. So the initial question in Pinker's book is really, does perception come from reality, or are we creating reality from inside our heads? And the argument is both. So perception comes from reality, but the structure of perception comes from each individual person. So that's why you get individual differences in understanding of what happened in a situation, or if you're talking to your friend about a movie, why you each have a different interpretation of that movie. So you can use metaphors as a vehicle to study language, our understanding of language. So there's some metaphors that we use without thinking. So genetic code. So people, when they were really mapping DNA, they didn't have a good way to explain it to non-technical people, like people outside the field. That's what I'm trying to say. So they came up with this idea that it's like a computer code. And now when people say genetic code, you don't even blink because it has become such a pervasive metaphor. Or for heat flow. So apparently it doesn't really flow like water, but it's close enough that it explains the process. So these differences in the way we use verbs and nouns can help us understand the underlying process of language by studying things like metaphors. So the point of language is to convey some sort of meaning, and there's a social relationship between the speaker and the audience, which is usually the other person you're talking to or the other people you're talking to. And that social relationship combined with metaphors is how we're getting to cursing. So if you say, pass the salt if you don't mind, that includes the request, pass the salt, and that social relationship. If you don't mind is sort of is a way to not be rude, or pass the salt, please. You're adding in that component of we're friends and being nice to you, but pass the damn salt, right? And so you don't realize that people have added these extra components as a way to indicate that social relationship. Okay. All right, so you should go and watch the video link I've provided under additional resources, and it's a link to George Carlin's 7 Dirty Words You Can't Say on Television, and thinking about when you tell someone, fuck you, what are you really saying to them? It could be used informally when you have a joke, like, oh my God, right? Or it could be used in anger. And so the interesting thing about the F word is that it is used in so many different ways. It makes a perfect example of understanding language as a metaphor, along with the language, the social relationship in language. Okay. So talking about profanity, the traditional definition is words that were profane, not allowed in church. But now people tend to talk about profanity or cursing as words that are insulting or rude or disrespectful. But now profanity has a special place in language because when you record spoken speech, it's used in language only slightly less than we use pronouns. So pronouns about 1% of language, cursing is about 0.7% of language. So we are using the F word and bitch and damn just as much as we use words like you, me, I, she, he, and it. And then I have my list of the most common words used, and I always feel like goddamn is cheating because it's part of damn as well, but they are considered separate words. And then we have phrases like Jesus Christ that a lot of people believe is a curse. And so the cool thing about profanity or cursing is that its original definition was that it was insulting, but that's not the way we really use it. In many cases, we're using it as a social role builder where we are relating to someone versus insulting them. So it's interesting to study because it's used as frequently as we use words that are very innocuous. So there's a couple of uses. So there's dysphemic profanity. It's a curse used to get some people to think about it as like a provocative thing. So saying that you got really screwed on your taxes. And that's a way, like, when you go from screwed to fucked, it like just adds that extra, like, whoa, to it. Abusive profanity is your ethnic slurs, and those are used as insults. So those are the N-word, which I won't use because it does even make me uncomfortable. When you call, you've got kikes, spics. Oh, it's so uncomfortable, right? Because we tend to think of abusive profanity as the terrible ones, the insulting ones. But the interesting thing about that is that the majority group, so Caucasians, don't tend to feel that there are abusive profanities for them. So if somebody called me a cracker, I'm just sort of like, okay, that's awkward. But it is much more abusive when it's towards a minority group, especially majority to minority group. There's idiomatic cursing, which is used to express emotion sort of informally, so it's arousing interest. And so you're just sort of getting people's attention. There's empathetic cursing, so and not empathy, but emphasis. So you're adding an emphasis to your statement. That's when you're like really frustrated. You're like, fuck, really? Is that really going to be how it is? That sort of thing. My favorite is cathartic cursing. So this is the one where you spill something on yourself or you stub your toe, and so it's a negative emotion release. And the thing about cathartic and cursing is it's one of the only ones that isn't necessarily directed at another person. So it's usually used for a release of emotion internally. So it's not necessarily used in a relationship. So when you spill something on yourself, or for me, I trip and fall. And the cool thing is that it comes from the amygdala. So the amygdala, remember, is the emotion center, and especially the right amygdala activates when this sort of thing happens. The different types of curses. So there's the supernatural curses. Those are the, now Pinker, you have to realize, is an atheist, so he means religious words. The bodily function curses, shit, piss. The disease and death curses, which are not as used anymore, but things like, oh, I hope you get AIDS, or something kind of weird like that. Sexuality curses are still like way too many to name, right? And then there's ethnic slurs, the obvious category. So how strongly do we feel about these sorts of things? And it varies by person, clearly, and culture. But when one of the first words considered curse words was used in a movie, right? So frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And that was used in 1939 in Gone with the Wind, and it was extremely taboo. And now when people say damn, you just don't even blink. Like, that's one of the words that you can say on television now. And so the intensity of words badness tends to decrease with exposure. So the more you're around them, the less you sort of have a fit about them, if you will. So just because of exposure, we don't feel that strongly about that word. However, one clause that's not true, racial words or ethnic slurs tend to become more profane over time because of things like hate crimes. Now it's very uncool to say something that's like, oh, that's so gay. Whereas when I was growing up, that was no big deal. But because of the sort of awareness of hate crimes and LGBT, what's the word I'm looking for? Not awareness, but like rights and culture, that became much more offensive to say. So it depends on culture as well. So in the US, fuck is the strongest one, and cunt, especially if you're a girl, oh gosh, that word is just awful, are considered the two strongest if we ignore racial slurs. But in the UK, the word cunt, meh. It's actually not specific to women as much, and so it's more gender neutral. And it's sort of similar to calling somebody an asshole. So culture plays a big role in our understanding of metaphors. So what does it mean? Like I said, the cool thing about the F word is it is used as every form of speech. So it might actually mean sex, which is one of its technical definitions. It might mean that you're being cheated. It might be a person, fucker. It might mean messing around. It's used as an interjection. It's used as a noun and a verb and like every part of speech. So that's a cool thing about it because almost no other word can claim that. So where did it come from? So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, it is Germanic with a sexual meaning. First time it was seen in language was in this Latin English coded poem for meaning like it was sort of like a hidden message in the poem. It was used as in a contract to mean male-studded goats, I believe, and so the more sexual use of the word. In German, Swedish, and Norwegian, it's all a term for sex. It's possibly Latin-based, but it is not the joke of song where it's for unlawful carnal knowledge in the nude, police code. That's not true. That's not where it's from. But it didn't appear in the English dictionary until 1972. Well, clearly people were using it before that time, but we didn't feel like we should stick it in the dictionary until the 70s. And then let's look at another word, bitch. It was used in the 1100s, which is the term for dog. So it's a female dog in heat. The 1400s was the first time it was used as a slur against women in a play, and they were comparing her to a dog in heat. And then it was used in an Elton John hit called The Bitch Is Back in the 1970s. So the difference between these two words that I really want you to get is that, in some cases there's a clear spot when it became a slur or profane word, like bitch. And then there's times where it's unclear when it became such a dirty word, like fuck. So if you want to read more about this, go get The Stuff of Thought, fantastic book. Another great book on sociolinguistics, so the understanding of how we use words in relationships to other people, is Deborah Tannen's That's Not What I Meant, and looking at interpersonal relationships, so you don't quite get what I said. And Tannen actually has a bunch of books on this topic, and they're all great reads.